everybody, welcome to the show. Around the nation right here, Jeff Waldorf here with you. Feeling a little bit better today, so we are good to go. All right, so we've got a lot of interesting stories here, especially relating to what happened yesterday that I didn't get to cover. That's the Flynn memo. That's very interesting. That's actually our first story. Then we're going to get into a little bit of fun with Rudy Giuliani. Then we have both Michigan and Wisconsin. There's some interesting shit going down in both those states, especially relating to the incoming powers of the new governor and attorney generals in the states. It is nothing more than a blatant power grab, and you are going to be pissed when I share the details about that. So, look, you ever think about voting for Republicans? As bad as the Democrats are, get a load of what the Republicans are doing after they lost. Oh boy. Then, of course, we'll talk about Ajit Pai and the newest attempt, of course, to try to see what happened to the public comment section when it came to net neutrality. Of course, net neutrality, we might not have it now, but the fight is still far from over, and there was some definite shady shit that happened when it came to the public comment period. And for some reason, Ajit Pai just doesn't want us to know what happened. Interesting. So that's what we've got here. Oh boy. So it's going to be an interesting show, guys. Now, if you haven't already, please give us a like. Please share the stream out. That helps out very much so. If you guys are watching on YouTube, of course, share that as well. Share that around to as many pages as you can to help get out the word about the live stream. Really been picking up our Facebook presence, I should say, working towards that 10,000 follows, etc. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun, right? Trying to build that up. And so, if you could help that out, help me out with sharing that around, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so any more news? I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Of course, George H.W. Bush, Donald Trump not acting like an ass for at least one day on that, which is good. So not really going to talk about it all that much because, look, we shouldn't like devote special coverage to when the president doesn't shit his pants on live TV. So that's good. George W. Bush, however, or George H.W. Bush, however, warmonger, not a fan of him. So you guys saw the segment that I did on it a couple of days ago. Got a little bit of pushback from that, from the civility police. Oh, you guys need to be civil. He just died. What about his family? Look, man, his family, I understand, like, I feel bad, right? They lost their father, and that's a hard thing to do. But let's not lie about what he did. Let's not gloss over, paper over the harm that he caused in both Iraq and domestically. So, hey, you know, like, let's just be honest about the record. Because if we're not honest about it, then we've basically just whitewashed somebody who is considered a war criminal. And not just by me, but by his actions. So a little bit of honesty is something that needs to be talked about when someone passes away. But anyway, so first we'll get to that story about the Flynn memo. Then we'll get to, as I said before, a little bit of fun with Rudy Giuliani, and then the serious stuff with Michigan and Wisconsin. So, all right, let's move on. Let's get into it. Whoops. Oopsie. I think I buried the lead on that one. Okay. Anyway. A special counsel Robert Mueller on Tuesday filed a prosecutor's sentencing memo on former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Now, Michael Flynn, of course, earlier had flipped on Donald Trump. Actually, this time, basically at this time last year, it's been a year since he pleaded guilty. Now, normally a prosecutor, of course, would allow cooperation in return for a reduced sentence if you have information that is helpful to that investigation. Now, look, and how helpful that information is, of course, determines how much they will recommend when it comes to sentencing. So it was really interesting what happened when the Mueller team came out with their sentencing recommendations on Michael Flynn. So is it going to be one of those lock him up situations, right? I mean, look, he did lie to federal investigators. He talked about, he lied about his relationship with the Russian ambassador at the time. So, and he ironically, during the GOP convention, led the chant of lock her up about Hillary Clinton. So is that what Mueller's going to say? Is he going to say lock him up, lock him up? Well, it turns out, no. After 19 interviews with Michael Flynn over the past year, the recommendation from Mueller, no jail time. None. So the official recommendation, of course, is like, we recommend no jail time, but you could give him probably 0 to 6 months. Max. Wow. Now, that's actually a pretty big deal because the minimum that he could have faced anywhere, and I could, hopefully, I mean, look, this is according to federal sentencing guidelines for lying to law enforcement. He could face up to anywhere from 5 to 20 years. So it's pretty significant that Mueller said, you know what? No, we're not going to recommend any jail time to Michael Flynn. Why? It's because of how much he cooperated with this investigation. According to the memo, the defendant has assisted with several ongoing investigations, a criminal investigation that we have no details of. All we know is that it's a criminal investigation, it's ongoing. That's why it was redacted in the report. Now, the special counsel's office investigation concerning any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald J. Trump. So that's the other one. And then, of course, there is the a third investigation that has been completely redacted. We don't even know the name. We don't even know what they're looking into. So that's 3 investigations that Michael Flynn has been helping the government with. Fascinating. So that really is interesting. Now, the defendant has also assisted with the SEO investigation concerning links or coordination, as I mentioned before, between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. And it's not just the campaign, of course, it's the transition. As Flynn was the guy who served both during the campaign and into the presidential transition. In fact, according to the memo, the defendant provided firsthand information about the content and context of interactions between the transition team and Russian government officials. So that's important as well. Now, for example, after the election, the defendant communicated with the Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, on 2 sensitive matters. A United Nations Security Council vote on a resolution calling for Israel to cease settlement of activities in Palestinian territory. Now, look, I think Israel should cease settlement of activities, or I'm sure, they should cease settlement activities in Palestinian territory. I think they should cede it. They should stop doing that. Because what you're doing is just you're basically inflaming tensions in Israel. So that's not a good thing. That's a terrible thing. The other thing that they talked about is the Obama administration's imposition of sanctions and other measures on Russia for interfering in the 2016 elections. So the Obama administration put some sanctions on Russia. Obviously, sanctions are not popular. They're not in favor of sanctions. They're like, hey, no, let's talk about maybe Trump, and this is speculation, maybe Trump removing those sanctions. Okay, great. Now, several other members that are senior members of the transition team also publicly repeated false information conveyed to them by the defendant, Flynn, which could be, of course, Mike Pence. So Mike Pence is like, well, look, I didn't know Flynn was lying to me, right, about this communication. I had no idea. And so that's what the memo says. So now here's the thing that it tells me, right? So the collusion investigation, I think, is almost over. Because look at all the information that was freely shared in the memo, right? Yes, there was some redactions, of course, but they didn't read the most information that we got is about the collusion investigation, which I think it means they're getting ready to wrap that up. Now, what's more interesting is the other investigations that we don't have any information on that involve Michael Flynn, that Michael Flynn had knowledge of. Look, and on 4 different separate occasions, the special counsel asked the judge to allow them more time for Flynn to cooperate with federal investigators. That's interesting. So Flynn knows something big. That means they're onto something big. Now, is it related to Trump? It could very well be. I don't know for certain because what we have is not a lot of information. Okay? Still, Mueller's mandate from Rosenstein, when he appointed him special counsel, was fairly broad, which means he was able to look into links between Trump and Russia, and whether it be financial links or financial crimes or anything even sort of related, right? So this unnamed criminal investigation that Flynn helped the Mueller team with, that is really interesting because as I thought before, here comes Donald Trump's possible financial crimes. And those, I think, are actually far more interesting than Russian collusion and actually could possibly even explain the possibility of Russian collusion. Because why would he collude with another country to try to become president? Well, look at financial ties. Look at the possibility. Look at the possible deal between Trump, Russia, when it comes to Trump Tower Moscow. And that possible deal that Donald Trump could make millions on. And when it comes to Donald Trump, you have to realize that Donald Trump is basically in it for himself. He's in it to make more money. So whatever deal you made or possibly made would have to deal with him making more money off of it. Oh, yeah, if I'm going to make money out of this deal, that's going to be great. I'll do it. Do I have to, allow or assist in any possible way another country messing in the election so that I can become president and make more money? That's a possibility. So I'm not going to rule that out. Although I know there are people out there that are still skeptical, and this report hasn't really said that there are definitive, that there's anything definitive there, but they're also saying that there's nothing that discounts that as well. So that's an important perspective to look at. For me, I think there is financial ties, and I think, of course, that probably ties in to the possibility of collusion. So that's my perspective on that. So now, again, and there's another reason that Flynn was also let off very easy, and it's because of his decision to flip early. Now, why is that? Well, according to the memo, the defendant's decision to plead guilty and cooperate likely affected the decisions of related first-hand witnesses to be forthcoming with the SCO and cooperate. Now, what that means, of course, is that's Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's fixer, who I think likely has even more really good information on Donald Trump. It's all coming around to close in on Donald Trump. He's gotten almost everyone around him. Again, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn, tried to get Paul Manafort. Manafort got the hammer dropped on him now. So some of the recent stories have the government basically taking away everything, like the mansion that Paul Manafort's wife was living in. So all that stuff that he got to keep and all the money, gone. Now, why would Manafort do that? Why would Manafort basically go and work with, try to pretend to work with Mueller, but actually just feed information to Donald Trump's lawyers? I don't know. What is he afraid of? Why would he give up all that money and all that stuff from that deal and then face a huge possible prison sentence? And, of course, losing all of that. So you just gotta wonder. It does make you wonder on that one. But again, I don't think this looks very good for Trump. It looks like he's gotten almost everyone around him to either flip and cooperate, or to get themselves into trouble as well. And they're closing in. Mueller is coming. So I think for me, it's only a matter of time. Tick tock, tick tock. Okay. Moving on to the next story. Former mayor and now Trump lawyer Rudolph Giuliani is being trolled on Twitter for not knowing how the internet works. So he's being trolled on the internet for being dumb, too dumb to understand the internet. That's awesome. Now, this whole thing began, of course, before the weekend, when Giuliani, who, by the way, is the advisor to Trump on cybersecurity, inadvertently created a URL with a tweet. Now, let me read you the tweet here from Giuliani. It said, Mueller filed an indictment just as the president left for G20. In July, he indicted the Russians who will never come here just before he left for Helsinki. Either. Could have been done earlier or later. Out of control. Supervision, please. So that thing was hard to read. Very, very difficult to read because, you know, typos and weird not putting enough spaces. I mean, come on. If you're going to tweet out from your cell phone, at least learn how to use the goddamn space bar. But anyway, his failure to leave a gap between G20 and in meant that Twitter basically interpreted it to be a website. You know what .in is? It is a common domain extension for websites located in India. Who knew, right? Just like .ru is Russia. So .in, India. Okay, that makes sense, right? So the social media platform made a hyperlink over the text. Now, what's funny is that somebody noticed that and was like, you know what would be a great idea? I'm going to make a website that links to that. And so they bought it and they posted this. So if you click that link, that's where you go in Rudy's tweet. Oops. Awesome. Now, by the way, that tweet is still up. It's still live. At least it was this morning. And I'm assuming it is still live. That's amazing, right? So now, of course, Giuliani, he's not happy about this, and he decided to come up with a conspiracy theory to explain his mistake. First, he says, Twitter allowed someone to invade my text. Invade my text. That's awesome. With a disgusting anti-president message. The same thing, period, no space, occurred later, and it didn't happen. Don't tell me they are not committed card-carrying anti-Trumpers. Time magazine also may fit that description. Fairness, please. Oh my God, he even sounds like Donald Trump in his tweets. I mean, they must be anti-Trump. That's why they allowed someone to invade my tweets. Nobody's invading your tweets. Somebody took advantage of your idiocy to play a joke on you, and it's funny. And look, talking about the second, right? The second period no space thing, right? You know, to be fair, somebody would have exploited that too if they could have. It turns out there is no domain extension for a .either. Of course, you would know that if you knew how that actually worked. But look, the reason that I say that is, look, a lot of people probably don't know that. And let's be fair about that, okay? Regular people, not necessarily sure how, you know, that whole thing works and creating hyperlinks out of text and how Twitter does that. Okay, look, we can allow that, right? If you're a regular person, you don't know about that, that's fine. This guy is Donald Trump's cybersecurity expert. He's in charge of the cyber. Oh. It's a wonder that either of them haven't sent money to Nigerian princes. So, of course, the internet, and I love this, decided to have a little bit more fun with him. And I've got some tweets to read here, which is great. Now, William Legate tweeted in response, "Sorry, Rudy, you weren't supposed to get that. Running some tests on the Soros-funded deep state emergency SMS notification system right now." Awesome. Lean Malenko says, "The internet is on computers now, Rudy." Yes. I don't know if you know that. It's not a series of tubes. Okay. I forget who says that, but that I will never forget the saying, because that's how old people think the internet works. I don't know. It's a series of tubes. Do you actually know how it works? Do you actually know what it actually does, or hypertext transport protocols, or a layer? Nothing like that. No, you don't know anything. You're supposed to be in charge of cyber. Oh my God. Okay. Anyway, Kim tweets in, "I get it. Websites can be a bit technical, but come on. Rudy doesn't even know how space bars work." Yeah. Space bars is probably something he thinks of as in Star Wars. Yeah, didn't Luke go to the space bar to meet Han Solo? Probably. Actually, yes, he did, to be fair. Now, Midnight John tweets, "So you have the audacity to brand yourself as a cybersecurity expert, but you don't know how domain name registration works. Maybe retire?" Overlord says, "I would pay big money to watch someone explain to you what actually happened." Yeah, well, that would probably end up being the face that he made. What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know. I don't understand what any of that means. I'm in charge of cyber. Mike P. Williams says, "Someone merely capitalized on your bumbling illiteracy. You're painting it as some sort of orchestrated left-wing traitor conspiracy. You got outsmarted and humiliated, which, let's face it, isn't difficult." So that's a little bit of hard truth there from Mike Williams. And finally, best one, Kevin Cruz says, "Tonight's episode of Grandpa Can't Understand the Internet is horrible." Hey, man, look, whatever happened to Donald Trump saying, "I'm going to surround myself with the smartest people, the best people"? Does that look like smart people right there? I don't think so. Look, likely, I'm sure he wanted to surround himself with some of the smartest people. It's just the smartest people didn't want to associate themselves with him. They took one look at the president and was like, "Yeah, nope, I'm not getting near that train wreck. And of course, all you have left, unfortunately for him, is people like Rudy Giuliani. Sad. All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We have a power grab going on in Wisconsin as well as in Michigan. We'll talk about those stories, serious stuff coming up on the show. So please stay here for that. Remember to like and share the stream. Tell your friends, your family, share it around. Pass it around like it's a doobie. I don't care what you do, as long as it helps the show get out. And of course, if there are any super chats, I will read them as well. So we'll be right back. A couple minutes. Stay right here around the nation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Run the Nation, Jeff Waldorf here with you. Now, I had a question here from Raven watching on Facebook. Yes, I will start trying to respond to questions from Facebook. So if you'd ask, I will try my best to respond. Anyway, she asks, how do I respond to people who say, all these people who want Medicare for all don't understand that it doesn't help and won't help the elderly? That's weird. They say it isn't going to allow the elderly to get as much as help as possible in their 20s and 30s. I don't even understand the question, Raven. Is somebody saying that? Because that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, oh no, it's not going to help old people as much in their... Again, I don't understand it. That person sounds like they have no idea what they're talking about. I just will say, Medicare for all will help everyone, especially people who are elderly. Because right now, older people buy into Medicare supplement plans. Because right now, Medicare is not actually full, right? So it's got a lot of gaps in it. Now, luckily, Bernie Sanders knows Medicare. He knows policy. And so he basically, in his plan, would expand Medicare to cover the things that right now current Medicare doesn't cover. That's why he's in the expansion of Medicare. So what that means is that older people won't have to buy those supplement plans in order to fill in the gaps. They'll already be filled in, so it actually does help people on Medicare who are elderly. So that person, that question that you're getting is from somebody who obviously doesn't understand what Medicare for all, the current plan is from Bernie Sanders, and so they need to read up on it, because look, there's a lot of ignorance going around, but really in the plan, it's all spelled out. So urge them to go look at Bernie Sanders on his website. That plan is there. It's right there, and you can see everything. And so that's what they're planning to do. All right. So anyway, no super chats. So let's get into more stories. Let's go into Republicans hating democracy. Okay. Here we go. So all over the country, Republicans are basically admitting that they hate democracy, that they despise democracy when they don't win. Now, earlier today, the Republican-controlled legislature in Wisconsin had approved a bunch of sweeping changes to weaken the governor's ability to make rules that would enact laws. So now, here's the thing. The incoming governor in Wisconsin is a Democrat. So now the legislation that they have actually passed, for one, would steal the state jobs agency from the governor's control until September and cuts into the power of the incoming Democratic Attorney General. Now, the measures would limit the governor's ability to promulgate administrative rules, which enact laws and give lawmakers the power to control appointees to the State Economic Development Agency's board. So basically, they want to continue to remain in control of that board and strip the powers of that agency. Now, that agency, of course, is basically in charge of giving out subsidies and things like that to encourage businesses to create jobs in that area. So the Democrats, we don't believe in, well, a lot of us, progressives at least, don't believe in giving gigantic subsidies to corporations and tax breaks because they don't pay off. And there are a lot of Democrats out there that don't believe in giving tax breaks to certain corporations for doing certain things, because that ends up costing the state a lot of revenue and not really creating that many jobs. So what Scott Walker and his administration was doing was basically handing out all these freebies in return for a few jobs, which ends up basically costing the state a lot of money in lost potential revenue. Now, not only that, but another piece of important legislation that was passed earlier today that will likely be signed by Governor Scott Walker is a measure that would require the Attorney General to get legislative approval to withdraw from lawsuits. Now, that's lawsuits that are enacted on behalf of the state. Now, why is that important? Well, it turns out that right now, Wisconsin is suing the federal government to try to overturn the ACA. They're still trying to get rid of Obamacare. Because of course they are. And there's a multi-state lawsuit. Now that Republicans are no longer going to be in charge of those positions in Wisconsin, well, look, the Democrats ran on basically not trying to overturn the ACA. So if the Attorney General, who's a Democrat, look, he comes into office, right? He's not going to have the power to stop that lawsuit. And that's the whole point, to block him from being able to stop that lawsuit without legislative approval from, right now, what is Republicans. So now, the Democrat Josh Kaul would not be able to withdraw Wisconsin from the lawsuit challenging the ACA. Now, the measure also restricts early in-person voting to 2 weeks before an election. Right now, in the midterms, people were able to vote in Wisconsin 6 weeks early. That cuts that down to 2 weeks. So that's massive curtail of early voting. So already they've attacked the powers of the governor, the attorney general, and they've also attacked the voters into saying, hey, look, we don't want you voting early. Actually, we don't want you voting at all unless you're voting for Republicans, but this is the best that we can do in the lame duck. So I guess the question is, why vote for Democrats at all if you live in a red state? If the Republicans are just going to make sure that they actually can't do anything. But that's the whole point. See, they can't help but try to cling on to power instead of doing a peaceful transition of power, which is what you're normally supposed to do. Because, hey, get this. You lost. You lost the election. Now, look, every time Republicans win an election, they're like, we have a sweeping mandate to enact our policies of tax cuts and deregulation. Even if they win with a very small majority, they still end up winning. Okay, fair. Okay, you win, right? If you're going to go by Republican standards, even if you win by a small margin, you still end up winning. And therefore, okay, you have the power to enact your agenda. Now, of course, Republicans take that even further and say, mandate, complete mandate. Well, Republicans lost in Wisconsin by quite a bit. Now, wouldn't that mean that Democrats have a mandate? Well, if you follow Republican logic, then absolutely. However, Republicans are like, oh, no, you don't have a mandate. You don't have a mandate. You're still going to do what we want you to do because we don't believe in democracy. Oh, the voters didn't vote for us. They voted for Democrats. Don't care. We don't care about democracy. We don't care about any of that stuff. We're going to do whatever we want, and we're going to stop you from doing policies that your voters voted for. That's basically what it is. They're going against the will of the voters, right? Now, not only are they sabotaging the Democrats openly, right, but the Wisconsin Senate also rejected a bill that would have created a state guarantee that people with pre-existing conditions could have access to health care. Now, look, here's the thing. It always frustrates me when we talk about access to health care, right? No, I believe health care is a human right. But at least the least that you can do is to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions could have access to health care, to have health insurance. But that little bit, the Republican legislature says, no, if you have a pre-existing condition, we do not want you to have access to health insurance. We do not want that at all. Why? Because that costs our donors money. They don't get as much in premiums because they end up having to pay out. Now, not only that, but Republicans also passed a bill enacting a Medicaid work requirement. Now, that measure would prevent incoming Democratic Governor-elect Tony Evers from withdrawing from a federal waiver request to implement the work requirement for able-bodied adults younger than 50. So they're like, no, we don't believe that you should have work requirements. That's punishing poor people. No, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The Republicans said, no, we want to impose a work requirement. And then they set it up to where the Democratic governor can't remove that work requirement. So he has to, and this is what it comes down to. Even though you have a Democratic governor and a Democratic attorney general, they are still doing the GOP agenda because they have been forced into doing it, despite being swept out of power by the votes. The Democrats will not be able to do a whole lot policy-wise in Wisconsin. This is a direct slap in the face to the voters of the Wisconsin who said that they were tired of GOP rule. They were tired of Republican policies that were anti-worker and basically anti-anyone who isn't a wealthy person or wealthy donor or a corporation. The Democrats of Wisconsin, by the way, they should never let the voters forget about this, what is basically a blatant power grab. And when somebody always gets mad at them or for not enacting an agenda, all they can say is, look, man, the Republicans, they have hamstrung us. They have made sure in the using the power of the lame duck session to handcuff us before we could even get started. It's not us. It's them. This is what happens when you vote for Republicans. They will steamroll you in order to please their corporate masters. Even when they're out of power, they will still make sure that they have all the power. That's what Republicans do, and that's why they despise democracy. Okay. They're completely shameless. All right. Moving on. Let's go to Michigan, which I'm already in Michigan, so here we go. All right. Now, during the midterms and before, Michigan voters made it very, very clear that we wanted an increase in the minimum wage. Now, we overwhelmingly got signatures for a proposal that would ensure workers received a pay raise. Now, it's a modest pay raise, but nonetheless, it's a pay raise. And also, we wanted paid sick leave, just a little bit. Now, of course, those Republicans, they didn't want that. They're not in favor of that. And they, of course, used some tricky moves in order to gut a proposal so that they could serve their donors. Now, yesterday, the state's Republican-led Senate had pushed through major changes to both the minimum wage initiative and one that would have guaranteed paid leave for Michigan workers. Now, under the original minimum wage proposal, to show you how much they hate any sort of progress, the state's minimum wage would have gone up from $9.25 to $12 an hour by the year 2022. $9.25 to $12 an hour. Now, look, that is not a huge increase. That's very meager. Because, and the reason I give you that is I'm going to give you some context here, right? So you might think, oh, $12 an hour, that's a lot of money, dude. Ooh, that's living high, right? And $15 an hour, you crazy, dog. I mean, you know, we'd be selling $10 cheeseburgers. That's not exactly true. There have been plenty of states that have raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour, and McDonald's did not respond by making people buy $10 cheeseburgers. That's just not true. But anyway, now, to give you the context, right? According to MIT, a single parent in Michigan would need to earn a total of $23 an hour to make a wage that they could live on. This is without having to go on government assistance to help them out. So this is basically being able to afford to live, to get the minimum. $15, right? Or $23 an hour. This ballot initiative asked for 12. And yet, Republicans, they're like, no, we don't even want you to add half that. You want a helpful loaf? Too bad. Here's some crumbs. Under the Republican proposal, workers would have to wait until 2030 to get $12 an hour. So they couldn't get rid of it completely, and that's because of the Michigan Constitution. But they managed to slow it down a lot. And besides, here's the thing. Inflation, by the time it's 2030, inflation would have knocked out any possible gain to it anyway. And look, to be honest, wages have not gotten even close to keeping up with inflation, not to mention productivity. If inflation and productivity were factored in, we'd be making anywhere from $25 to $30 an hour, the minimum. So keep that in mind. Not only that, but tipped workers got screwed over pretty bad in this one as well. Their wages will only go up to $4 from $3.52 per hour by 2030 under the Republican proposal. So tipped workers, enjoy your eventual in 2030 less than 50-cent raise. Wow. Great. Not only that, but of course, is the sick leave proposal. Now, the sick leave proposal was gutted as well, and originally that was supposed to allow workers to accrue 1 hour of paid sick leave after 30 hours of work. However, the new version changes that to 1 hour after 40 hours. So, of course, that leaves out a lot of part-time workers. So if you're a part-time worker, you work under 40 hours. Well then, sorry, you work 39. You're not going to get that hour of sick leave. That it's paid off. Not going to happen. Sad day for you. It is estimated that 1 million Michigan workers who work for the state's 162,000 small companies would also be exempt from the right to paid sick leave under the GOP's bill. So that's not counting everyone else. So they don't care about workers earning a decent paycheck or getting sick leave. So, hey, if you're sick, you've got to show up to work if you don't have any sick leave. Or just not get paid for it. And with the low wages, well, people are not going to take days off to be sick. They're going to show up when they're sick because they can't afford not to. They can't afford to take a day off. So that's what this is about. But those are bad enough, right? But it's not just what Republicans did to water the bills down that's egregious. No, it's actually also how they decided to do this. Now, Michigan voters had demanded the passage of the original proposals, with MI Time to Care leading the push for the sick leave bill and One Fair Wage gathering 400,000 signatures from Michiganders who supported the minimum wage hike, right? However, in September, state lawmakers voted to approve the initiatives. Well, now that it's interesting, oh no, here, we're Republicans, we're actually going to approve this, right? However, they only did that because it would keep the proposals off election day ballots. And that later on, because if you're voted in by ballot, obviously that becomes part of the state constitution, right? And so the state constitution, it's really hard to get rid of legislation from the state constitution. So like, oh God, we can't allow that. Let's just pass it through our legislature. And then later on, we can change it. We can gut it. And that's exactly what they're doing during this lame duck session. Now, here's the thing. Republicans do this because they didn't want to listen to the will of the people. They only listened to their corporate donors. Now, groups like ALEC and the NRA, that's the National Restaurant Association, not the Rifle Association, and numerous pro-corporate groups, they cannot stand increases in the minimum wage. It's not that they can't afford it, it's because it ends up having a slight decrease in their member groups' profit margins. So these big corporations, McDonald's, Walmart, etc., Burger King, they pay Republican politicians legal bribes to do their bidding against the people, by hook or by crook. And this is exactly a great example of them doing that. Now, what's interesting is they might have actually overextended themselves when it comes to Michigan. Some experts have argued that the GOP strategy violates Michigan's constitution. Now, this goes back, of course, to a legal opinion written in 1964 by a Democratic attorney general who argued that voter-initiated laws, which is what these were, cannot be changed in the same legislative session. So, oh, interesting. So, Republicans, they passed this earlier this year. They passed it in September. and then they decided to change it in the lame duck before they lost power. That would be a violation if that holds up. So, look, here's the thing. Look, when has any modern Republican Party listened to any sort of constitution? Whether it be the state or the actual Constitution of the United States? Well, they don't. I mean, the only thing that they understand is the Second Amendment. That's the only national constitution that they listen to, constitutional amendment. But when it comes to state constitutions, they rewrite it, they challenge it, and basically ignore it when it's inconvenient. When it's inconvenient to both them and their donors. And so, and that's the thing. That's who they serve. That's why they blatantly are trying to stop Democrats from enacting the policy agendas that the voters voted for. And it's not just the ballot measures either. Republicans in Michigan are trying to stop the soon-to-be governor and attorney general from actually doing things that they campaigned on. For example, Republican lawmakers are considering proposals that would give them more authority to intervene in legal fights involving the state and would shift oversight of campaign finance to Republicans. Meaning that Dana Nessel, as Attorney General, would not be able to withdraw Michigan from the anti-ACA state lawsuit. Which, of course, Nessel and Whitmer are pro-ACA. But under this, they wouldn't be able to withdraw because, well, they would have to have legislative approval. And of course, right now, Republicans, and in the future, Republicans will be in charge of the legislature until they're voted out. Now, Nessel could also be forced to defend the law that lets faith-based adoption organizations turn away same-sex couples. Now, Dana Nessel is openly gay, and she's obviously not in favor of that law. She says that is discriminatory. And she says, I will absolutely not defend it. However, here are the Republicans saying, oh no, we're going to make sure that you will defend it. So that's going to end up being a major legislative fight. And that's not what Michiganders voted for in these elections. That's not what we wanted. And Michigan isn't the only place where Republicans are brazenly grabbing power. You also have Wisconsin, that stripped both the governor and the attorney general of some of their powers. In North Carolina, there's a bill that would require election boards in every county in the state to be chaired by a member of the political party with the highest number of registered voters in odd-numbered years. Now, wait, well, that's weird. Now, during even-numbered years, the boards would be chaired by a member of the party with the second highest number of registered voters. Now, why would you do that? That's really strange. Why set it up like this? Well, it turns out in North Carolina, they have more registered Democrats than Republicans. I know that's a big shock. I was surprised. But what that would mean is that a Republican member of every election board in the state would be in charge of voting procedures during election years. So the way that's set up is to make sure Republicans, whenever there's an election, happen to be in charge of the voting. Now, why is that a terrible thing? Well, it turns out that North Carolina Republicans are in the middle of a massive election fraud scandal. Oops. Now, that, of course, involves people, paying other people to pick up ballots and then drop them off, not mail-in ballots, not to actually mail them in or turn them in, but to turn them into a GOP operative that's also a criminal who has been convicted. So North Carolina got a little bit of problems. But here's a North Carolina legislature saying, don't care. We're going to get them by fraud, by hook or by crook, man. We are going to make sure Republicans are in charge of these elections so we can continue to cheat and continue to win. It's blatant, man. Gee, I wonder if we should keep letting Republicans right now be in charge of elections. Republicans overwhelmingly commit voter fraud. I know, right? The very minuscule amount of voter fraud that actually happens is perpetrated usually by Republicans because they're like, oh, I just want to see if we can actually catch voter fraud. Yeah, we caught voter fraud, and you were the one who was doing it. Way to go, dumbass. And then, of course, electoral fraud is overwhelmingly done by Republicans as well. And look, you look at both Kansas and you look at Georgia, right? Both of those elections, and this was the Republican primary in Kansas, by the way, Chris Kobach. Chris Kobach was trailing his opponent, his Republican opponent in the primary. There was a weird glitch that happened, and suddenly Kobach is way ahead in the polls. Wasn't that weird? Isn't that electoral fraud or the possibility? Don't know. They didn't look into it, but it sure looks suspicious. And then, of course, you have Brian Kemp in Georgia, who was running that election and refused to resign as the head of that election until it was certain that he had beat Stacey Abrams in a race that was really incredibly close. That's not weird at all. Both of those elections are marred by the allegations of electoral fraud. It turns out that if you can't beat them legitimately, then either cheat them, or when you lose, strip away their power. That's the current Republican MO. They didn't used to be like this. No, Republicans used to be a lot different when it came to at least respecting some voter rights and respecting the peaceful transition of power. That is not the modern Republican Party. That is not the Republican Party that I grew up seeing. They haven't been like that for a very, very long time. And so that should be a lesson as to why you shouldn't vote for Republicans. Right now, the modern Republican Party hates democracy. They don't care about the will of the people and only seem to care about their own power while also serving their donors. They need to be taught a lesson. And that lesson is to lose every single election. And look, if you want to get even more extreme, every time a Republican loses and a transition of power, do the same thing back. If a Democrat loses an election and a Republican administration comes in, you strip their power, just until they learn. Okay. One more story here. We're going to try to make it quick. Doing a good job so far. Okay. So Ajit Pai is the head of the FCC. Now, the FCC had, of course, repealed net neutrality protections. And look, the public comment period has come under a lot of scrutiny because during that time, there were millions of comments that were copy-paste that were coming from some very dubious sources. So now the New York Times decided to look into this and to see where some of these fake accounts were coming from and whether or not they were coming from Russia. So now there's this thing where if something weird happens, a lot of the media tends to be like, well, maybe it's Russian. Now, I don't necessarily believe that. Nonetheless, I think that this is actually a good idea to look into it, to look into this FOIA request, because somebody was making these fake comments that were drowning out legitimate voices in the comment period for net neutrality. Now, the Times did make this Freedom of Information Act request back in June of 2017 for the FCC server logs. And they also took the FCC to court in September over the agency's refusal to release those records. Now, the court case hasn't gone anywhere. It's still pending. However, the Times had appealed directly to the FCC to reverse its FOIA decision. The new news on this is that on Monday, they had denied that appeal. Now, the Times FOIA request was for the server logs related to the system for accepting public comments on the FCC's repeal of net neutrality, right? Now, the Times, as I said before, was looking into Russian involvement. A similar request was made by BuzzFeed, and of course, the FCC had rejected both of them. That is very curious. Again, I'm skeptical that it's the Russians, but I think it's far more likely that the paid bots and trolls were actually created by the industry itself in order to make sure that the industry gets their net neutrality repeal. And that, because that would mean millions of dollars in profit for these companies. So like, yeah, of course, we'll go and create these bots and trolls and we'll inundate this to make it seem as if net neutrality is very unpopular and that Ajit Pai's repeal represents the will of the people, which is horse crap. Even a majority of Republicans, a large majority of Republicans, are in favor of net neutrality rules. Why? It's because it keeps the internet free, open, and competitive, instead of allowing the ISPs to essentially be gatekeepers that if you do not pay them a ransom, will either slow down your internet or speed everyone else's up so that you can't remain competitive. They're basically trying to act as highwaymen to the information superhighway. That's not what Republican business owners want. It's not what a lot of corporations want. That's why you had some of the biggest names on the pro-net neutrality side be companies like Google, which, of course, as I said, has a financial incentive. Netflix, Mozilla, a lot of these tech companies are in favor of net neutrality because they grew up on the internet. And having that free and open internet space where all content is treated equally, and when it comes to speed at least, and access, well, look, that was an important reason that these companies were able to get as large as they were and to be as successful as they were. Without that, a lot of companies might not have made it. But anyway, now one of the commissioners, the only Democratic commissioner left, Jessica Rosenworcel, basically was the only one to dissent as well. The rest are Republicans on the board because you had all the Democrats essentially resign in protest. Now, Rosenworcel basically asked, what is the Federal Communications Commission hiding? And she pointed out the widespread fraud in the net neutrality proceedings, saying that as many as 9.5 million people had their identities stolen and used to file fake comments. That is a crime under both federal and state laws. She said, quote, "Something here is rotten, and it's time for the FCC to come clean. Regrettably, this agency will not do this on its own, so it falls to those who seek to investigate it from outside its walls." And of course, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, and these outlets should get a lot of credit for trying to do that. Even if they're trying to come at it from maybe it's the Russians angle, I think it's still important to look into this and to see who actually created these comments. I don't think you're going to be surprised if you find that it's a lot of telecom communications companies that are, putting up these bots and trolls so that they can, they were successful. They did that so they could be successful at killing net neutrality rules. Now, part of the reason, of course, they want to do that is money and paid prioritization, right? Now, Pai and other Republicans won't allow investigators to look at the servers. Now, the thing about that is that suggests to me that he either already knows that to be the case, that it's nothing more than industry, or suspects that it is industry and doesn't want to do anything about it because it would get in the way of their profit margin. After all, Pai was a Verizon lobbyist, and all these Republican politicians on the FCC are paid by these telecommunications companies. That's why they don't want people looking at the logs. They'll find out, I think, that the will of the people on net neutrality, which is fairly clear in all the different polls leading up to the net neutrality vote, that basically these people were drowned out by nothing more than bots and trolls, the regular people who believe in net neutrality. And at the end of the day, the question is, well, what are they afraid of? The answer is democracy and the will of the people. Okay. That's it. That's all I got for you guys. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. If you haven't already, please give us a like and a share. Also, we're partnered up with Microbinge, which is a social media site that is trying to be the anti-Facebook. So they're looking for people to sign up. It's free, of course, but there are also paid members, which will give you some perks and also lead to them no longer being a profit-supported model. So they want to get away from that. They want to get away from being supported by ads. So, and they don't want to sell your information or any of that. So look them up, microbench.com. All right, guys, we're out of here. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.